He was, by most measures, the richest human being who has ever lived. Not the richest man of his decade, not the richest in his country. The richest, adjusted for the size of the world's economy, in recorded history. Richer than Rockefeller, richer than Carnegie, richer than any tech founder alive today. On his desk sat a diamond, 185 carats, worth, in today's money, somewhere in the region of $100 million. He used it to hold down paper. And in the same decade, this man refused to buy himself a new blanket. Not because he couldn't find one, because the cheapest one he was offered cost 10 rupees more than he was willing to pay. 10 rupees. At the time, a few dollars. His name was Mir Osman Ali Khan. He ruled a kingdom the size of Italy. Time magazine put him on the cover and called him the richest man in the world. And within 11 years of that cover, the kingdom was gone, the treasury was seized, and the greatest private fortune in human history began an unraveling that has never fully stopped. This is the story of the man who owned everything and spent almost nothing. To understand how one man came to hold that much money, you have to understand what was underneath his kingdom. Hyderabad sat on the Deccan Plateau in southern India. It was enormous, over 200,000 square kilometers, the largest of all the princely states under British rule, home to millions of people. It had its own currency, its own railways, its own army, and it had Golconda. The Golconda mines were, for a long stretch of history, the only meaningful source of diamonds on the planet. Before Brazil, before South Africa, if a diamond existed anywhere in the world, it almost certainly came out of the ground here. The Koh-i-Noor came from these fields. So did the Hope Diamond. So did the Regent, the Orlov, the Darya-i-Noor. Think about what that means. For roughly 2 centuries, one kingdom held a near monopoly on the single most concentrated store of value humans had ever devised. Not oil, which has to be pumped and shipped and refined. Not land, which cannot be moved. Diamonds, wealth you can carry in a pocket that never rots, never rusts, and is recognized as valuable in every country on earth. That is the foundation. Generation after generation, the rulers of Hyderabad, the Nizams, accumulated. And crucially, they did not spend. By the time Osman Ali Khan inherited the throne in 1911, at the age of 25, he was not inheriting a business or an estate. He was inheriting an accumulation. Vaults of gold bullion, rooms of jewels. Pearls, by some accounts, measured not in strings but in volume, enough, the stories said, to fill a swimming pool. Whether that specific image is literal or legend almost doesn't matter. The point survives either way. The wealth had stopped being countable. It had become a landscape. On the 22nd of February 1937, Time magazine put his face on its cover. The headline was simple: "The richest man in the world." Now, here is where we have to be careful, because this is the part most retellings get wrong. Nobody knows exactly what he was worth. There was no audit. There was no public filing. There was a treasury, a hoard, and a series of estimates made by people looking in from the outside. Contemporary reports at the time of that Time cover put his fortune somewhere between $1 and $2 billion. That is $1937, a figure that on its own means very little to a modern ear. So historians do something more useful. They ask, what share of the world's economy did this one man control? The answer is roughly 2% of the entire United States gross domestic product. Let that land. Not 2% of a company, not 2% of an industry, 2% of the output of the largest economy on the planet, held by a single private individual. When you convert that forward using the modern American economy as the yardstick, the estimates land somewhere between $77 billion and $236 billion in today's money. The range is wide because the method is contested. But even at the low end, he outranks almost everyone alive. At the high end, no living person is close. And in the middle of all of it sat the Jacob diamond, 185 carats, one of the largest cut diamonds in the world, worth tens of millions of dollars. He kept it in a drawer, wrapped in newspaper. When he needed to weigh down a stack of documents, he took it out. That is not eccentricity. As we'll see, it is the single most revealing fact about him. Because here is the contradiction that made him famous, and that still makes people shake their heads nearly 60 years after his death. The richest man in the world lived like a man with debts. He wore the same clothes for years, plain, worn, unremarkable. Visitors who expected splendor reported a small man in an old cap, sitting in a room that would not have looked out of place in a modest household. He is said to have collected the cigarette ends left behind by his guests. He negotiated over trivial sums. And there is the blanket, the story that has outlived almost everything else about him. He needed a new one. He was shown the options. The cheapest exceeded what he had decided to spend by 10 rupees. He declined and kept the old one. Now, the easy reading of this is that he was simply a miser, a hoarder, a man broken by too much money. But look at it from a different angle and something more interesting appears. He was not confused about what his diamond was worth. He knew exactly what it was worth. That is precisely why it was a paperweight and not a sale. To him, the jewels, the bullion, the treasury, none of it was money. It was the substance of the state itself. Spending it would have been like a country burning its own currency reserves to heat the palace. The hoard was not there to be enjoyed. It was there to exist. And it is worth saying clearly, because the miser stories tend to flatten him into a cartoon. This was not a man who did nothing with the state's money. He spent heavily on Hyderabad itself. Roughly a tenth of the state budget went to education. He made primary education free for the poor. He founded a university. Under his rule, the state built railways, roads, electricity, hospitals, reservoirs. Much of what modern Hyderabad physically is, he paid for. So the pattern is not simply greed. It is a rigid, absolute separation between the wealth of the state, which flowed, and the treasure of the dynasty, which never moved. He was, in the most literal sense, a custodian. He believed he was holding something in trust. He was wrong about how long he would get to hold it. In 1947, British rule in India ended, and the map that had held Hyderabad in place for 2 centuries simply dissolved. The princely states, hundreds of them, were told to choose: join India, join Pakistan. Their protection, their treaties, their guarantees, all of it had rested on an empire that no longer existed. Osman Ali Khan tried a third option. He attempted to remain independent, a separate sovereign state, landlocked, surrounded entirely by India. It was not, on paper, an absurd idea. Hyderabad was larger than many European countries. It had its own currency, its own railways, its own administration, and a treasury that outweighed most national reserves. But geography does not negotiate. In September 1948, India moved. The operation lasted a matter of days. Hyderabad was annexed. The kingdom ceased to exist as an independent entity. He was not killed. He was not exiled. He remained in Hyderabad, was given a ceremonial position, and lived on until 1967. But the thing he had been holding in trust, the state, the treasury, the entire structure that made the hoard mean something, was gone in less than a week. The 11 years between the time cover and the annexation are the whole story compressed. In February 1937, he is the richest man alive, on the cover of the most influential magazine in the world. By September 1948, the kingdom that produced that wealth has been absorbed into another country. Nothing was stolen in a dramatic heist. There was no crash. An entire structure of ownership simply stopped being recognized. What happened afterwards is, in a way, the more instructive part. And it is where the story stops being about one strange man and becomes about how fortunes actually die. Because the treasure did not vanish. It fragmented, Some was seized by the new state. Some was locked in disputes that ran for decades. Some was sold. Some was divided among an enormous extended family. The Nizam had many descendants, and each generation split the remaining claim into smaller and smaller pieces. This is the arithmetic that quietly destroys almost every great dynasty, and it needs no villain at all. A fortune divided among 4 children becomes quarters, divided again among their children, sixteenths. 2 more generations and the original hoard, however vast, has been sliced into portions that no longer function as wealth. They function as an inheritance dispute. Add legal battles that run for decades, across multiple countries and multiple legal systems, and the lawyers become a meaningful claimant in their own right. Historians describe the dispersal of the Nizam's wealth as one of the 20th century's most dramatic reversals of fortune. Not because someone took it in one dramatic act, because it was subdivided, contested, frozen, taxed, sold, and litigated until the greatest private fortune in human history stopped behaving like a fortune. The Jacob diamond survived. It is no longer a paperweight. It sits in a state collection, an object the public can look at, which is, when you think about it, exactly what he feared. It stopped being held. It became displayed. So what is the lesson here? Because it is not "don't be a miser." He made one error, and it is the same error dozens of dynasties before and after have made with land, with companies, with gold. He confused the container for the contents. His wealth was not diamonds and bullion. His wealth was a position, a kingdom, a monopoly, a treaty system, a set of political arrangements that made his ownership of those objects meaningful and enforceable. The gems were downstream of that. They were only worth something because a structure existed that said they were his. When the structure went, the objects stayed exactly the same. Same carats, same weight, same brilliance. And the wealth evaporated anyway. And here is the cruelest part. Because he never spent, never diversified, never converted, never moved anything offshore into a form that would survive a change of flag, there was no second position to fall back on. Everything was in one place, under one legal order, in one kingdom. The families who last do the opposite. They spread across jurisdictions, across asset classes, across legal systems. Precisely so that no single political event can take all of it, it looks like caution. It is actually the only known defense. He was the most disciplined saver in modern history. He was also, in the end, completely undiversified. Mir Osman Ali Khan died in 1967 in the city he had ruled, decades after the kingdom that made him the richest man alive had stopped existing. He had held, at his peak, something like 2% of the American economy. He had used a $100 million stone to stop paper blowing off a desk, and he had refused a blanket over 10 rupees. For most of a century, people have told that last detail as a joke, the absurd cheapskate with the diamond paperweight. But he understood something about his position that the joke misses entirely. He knew the hoard was not spendable, because spending it would have admitted it was money rather than substance. What he did not understand was that it was not permanent either, that the whole thing rested on a political arrangement that could end, and did end, in a matter of days. Every fortune sits inside something, a company, a country, a legal system, a set of rules that says this belongs to you. The people who keep their money are rarely the ones who save hardest. They are the ones who understand what their wealth is actually sitting on, and what happens the day that thing gives way. This is the quiet rich, where we take apart the economics the wealthy would rather you never understood. Subscribe, and we'll show you the next one.